Yes.
Yes, so originally this discussion was intended to be live, but we're having a pre-recorded forum. We're here where we are. Opposition leader, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And why is this important?
We felt it's important to break it down, distill it, so that the public has a better idea of what's actually in it. We'd originally planned to do this live on Tuesday afternoon. After we had sent out our notice that we would be doing this, a notice came out saying that Parliament would be convened for Tuesday. So we decided to pre-record it because we have to attend Parliament on Tuesday afternoon.
So we are here because we want the people to understand what is contained in the report, given the seriousness of what the findings indicate. And we have compiled questions that we have seen on social media and those that have been given to us through WhatsApp messages, etc. Now, on August 31, 2023, Prime Minister Andrew Holness was told in a face-to-face meeting that he was under investigation for possible illicit enrichment for over a year, and he said nothing whilst maintaining he was unaware of the reason for his declaration not being certified. Senator Motley, what do you make of this?
Well, let me say, first of all, Cleveland, that this is not a happy moment for the People's National Party, and it cannot be a happy moment for the country. Because it is clear, no matter how you look at it, that the Prime Minister has been unable to be certified for a number of years. And in responding to questions asked about it, he said that he did not know why, that he had provided all the information which was required. Now, as it turns out, we can debate the date. He says he was unaware before the 18th of August, but it was clear from the correspondence and the detail which was in the report that he was aware that he was being investigated. The word illicit enrichment, as you said, was used late, in my view, quite late in the investigation. So, Cleveland, a leader is expected to have a higher ethical standard because he or she will have to set the tone for what is right and wrong in the country. And I am of the view that Jamaica should be extremely concerned, no matter which political party you support, that our Prime Minister is under investigation.
I mean, it's very concerning that the decision was communicated in a letter from May 2023. It made reference to Section 14(5) of the Corruption Prevention Act, which is a section that creates the offense of illicit enrichment. A formal notice was, I think, dated August 18, which made specific reference to the elements of that offense, which is that you have assets which can't be supported by your declared income. And that warrants a request to explain yourself as to how you acquired those assets. He has known this from August last year. So for over a year, he has not come to the country and said, I am under investigation for illicit enrichment, even though the illicit 6 and the fact that there were these investigations of 6 parliamentarians, which became 8 later on, was well known as something that was being discussed constantly in the media and elsewhere. So it was, to my mind, a serious deception of the people to pretend or to hold back the fact that you as Prime Minister were one of the persons being investigated. So this is a big problem in terms of his credibility, his trustworthiness, and I don't think that we can have a leader of our country who has lost the trust and confidence of the people. This is why we're doing this, because we feel it's important that the people of Jamaica understand the seriousness of what is before us. And so the necessary decisions can be made to move the country forward.
I want to bring Member of Parliament Julian into the discussion. The IC in the report stated that the Director of Investigation was unable to arrive at a conclusion because he did not have access to Holness's personal expenses over the relevant period, along with unresolved questions around the companies that he is connected to.
Well, what he said specifically is that the Prime Minister refused to provide details of his personal expenses over the period of the investigation. And he could not conclude definitively on the issue of illicit enrichment because he needs to match income to expenditure. So here it is that you have a situation where the investigator is prevented from doing his work because the information he needs from the Prime Minister has not been made available to him. He goes on further to say that there are sources of funding for the 3 or 4 companies that the Prime Minister is involved with that he cannot ascertain where the funds have come from. And that is the main reason he has made a referral to the Financial Investigation Division, which investigates financial crimes.
One of the assets that you spoke of a while ago was an asset that Holness acquired in 2019. And the source of funding for that asset remains unexplained, Senator Bunting.
This is actually one of the more disturbing features, because what the investigation of the Integrity Commission has revealed is that funds were used from a charity. It's called Positive Foundation Jamaica. Positive Jamaica Foundation. A charity which, by definition, would have charitable purposes. And some funds in the region of approximately $32,000 US dollars were diverted to pay for a bond in the name of Mr. Holness.
Or his company, his personal company.
And I believe at some point it may have been either in his or his personal holding company, which he owns 100%. And it remained in that form for the life of the bond until it was called. And it was only after the bond had been redeemed and that transaction was now, in a sense, extinct.
Is it reasonable?
Closed. That, just allow me to finish, that upon questioning by the Director of Investigation that an attempt was made to repay that charitable foundation. So approximately 4 years had elapsed when the funds from the charitable foundation had been used to partially pay for a bond in the name of or for the benefit of Mr. Holness.
And the interest payments on the bond went into him or his personal company's account. And it's only when the Integrity Commission itself looked into this thing and said, hey, but some of the funding for this, 32,000 US of the 94,000 US cost of the bond, came from a charity with which Mr. Holness is very closely associated and is a director. That the necessary rearrangements of the thing were done and the money was returned to the charity. So for several years, he declared that bond as being his or his company's, and he received the payments under that bond for his or his company's account.
So it is not reasonable to assume that the Prime Minister would not have known that the entirety of the funds that were used to pay for the bond were attributed to him. It's not reasonable.
He had been getting statements regularly, which showed that the entirety of the amount was in a bond in his name or his company.
And the documentation he signed with the broker that he bought the bond through reflected that him or his company as being the purchaser of the bond. But he made the arrangements for the 32,000 to be paid by the charity into the purchase account to buy the bond.
And leader, this is in the context of legislation which was introduced to prevent exactly that with charities.
If I was a donor to this charity, and was to learn that the charity's resources, which are intended to be for charitable purposes, helping poor people, helping people who are sick or needy, were being used to purchase a financial asset for the Prime Minister or his personal company, I would be very upset about it. And that I know as a fact that foundation receives funding not only from Jamaica, but from outside as well. So it's a very serious matter.
Right. A part of the discussion that we have noted in the public domain is where the Director of Corruption Prosecution ruled that there is no evidence to support that the Prime Minister would have omitted willfully and intended to omit information from his statutory declarations. So there are two separate investigations that emanated from the Prime Minister's statutory declarations. I want you to discuss that first and tell us what were those two separate investigations. One relates to the omission of information for which the Director of Corruption Prosecution ruled, and then the second investigation was around illicit enrichment.
Well, I would say on the 4 accounts, there were 2 related to his parents put his name on, one with a former constituency manager and another one. Now, it's important to look at the detail. The Director of Investigation said he brought to Mr. Holness's attention on 3 occasions that his name was in fact on the accounts. And in spite of that, Mr. Holness did not declare those as part of his declaration. Secondly, and even more importantly, the Director of Investigation found that in 2 of those accounts, monies were flowing through the accounts from accounts solely controlled by Mr. Holness and to accounts solely controlled by Mr. Holness. So in essence, he's saying Mr. Holness said he knew nothing about these accounts, but funds are flowing in the region of millions of dollars. Deposits put in today, taken out the following week. 2 accounts controlled solely by him. So the question is, was Mr. Holness being truthful when he said, well, it's my parents' account and I don't know anything about it?
You know, I'm seeing a comment here on social media that we just bad mind over this side and that we don't want the Prime Minister to get rich. Is that the case, Comrade Leader?
Well, it's nothing to do with whether the Prime Minister should be rich or not. That's not the issue. The issue is to do with compliance with the requirements of the law relating to integrity and the statutory declarations that were made in this particular instance omitted certain bank accounts which at the end of the year, at the date of the declaration, had fairly modest balances, but through which much larger sums had flowed from Mr. Holness's accounts and to Mr. Holness's accounts. And that was a base upon which the Director of Investigations referred it to the corruption prosecutor to say, was this a deliberate falsehood on the declaration? Ultimately, she ruled that that could not be proved, and there was no prosecution to flow from that. But this was a relatively small matter in the scheme of this report. The bulk of this report is to do with the companies that Mr. Holness operates, has invested in or is a director of, assets that they have, the very high volume of transactions between them, and the fact that they are filing tax returns which have suggested that they're dormant or they have no taxable transactions at all, and also investments that have been made using the charities money, and we've discussed that already. So there's a lot in this report which suggests that we need to get to the bottom of this matter. And the decision of the Integrity Commission is that it should be referred to the FID for further investigation, because as Julian said, they can't take it, the Integrity Commission can't take it further because Mr. Holness refused to provide information that they required to complete the investigation. I mean, if you 3,600 transactions passing through 28 bank accounts, Mr. Holness was operating in his own name or the companies that he controlled, 28 bank accounts. And over a 3-year period, 3,600 transactions. This is the Prime Minister who was running the country at the time with some of the most important agencies and public bodies reporting to him. Yet he was conducting these very elaborate financial arrangements.
That's 1,200 transactions a year, which works out to be about, divided by, if you call it 360, that is what? 3-4 transactions a day.
Well, it's only banking days.
No, not banking days.
So 250.
Right.
It's 4 transactions.
4 transactions a day going among the 28 accounts. I mean, most people have 2, 3, 4 accounts.
Yeah.
How you keep track of that is...
What I wanted to respond to, because I think among the transactions, what is interesting is that 20 cardless cash deposits totaling 4,565,000 were made to Holness's JN bank account between May and July of 2020. The depositor is unknown.
Yes.
And what was the explanation given? Reimbursement from Norman Brown, shareholder of Estate Bridge. Senator Bunting, is this a reasonable explanation?
And I can tell you, as someone who has spent a large part of my career in the financial sector. That type of transaction is what bankers or financial sector employees are trained to raise a red flag about. It matches what would be called structuring, where you break a larger transaction, in this case a total of 4.6 million, into small transactions which are, or smaller transactions which are below the reporting threshold. However, one of the things you're also trained to do is to look for what are called high-risk customers. And so, for example, all of us who are in parliament or in politics are referred to as politically exposed persons, or PEPs, and should attract closer scrutiny than the average customer. So this series of transactions would match what is called structuring, and you're trained in your anti-money laundering training, all frontline staff of the banks, the compliance people, etc., to look out for these transactions. Not necessarily illegal, but it's a red flag. Mm-hmm. And then an obligation would be on the bank to either report it to the FID as a suspicious set of transactions, or to get a plausible explanation from the account holder. In this case, two sources of these series of 20 cash transactions. One was that Mr. Holness's business partner in Estate Bridge and the chairman of UDC owed him,
HAJ.
and Housing Association of Jamaica owed him some money. But to me, to suggest that somebody at the level of a chairman of UDC, who I'm certain either has a checkbook or an online banking facility or a banking app, is going to get up from his desk somewhere close to 20 times over the period of 3 months and go to an ATM
to
lodge cash, it doesn't seem plausible to me. The other source was rent of a Mona property, I think it was referred to. No, unless you're operating some sort of back road operation, usually rent is collected once a month. So that would, I imagine, only account for a small number of the total transactions. So even if that were the case, there's still a lot to be explained, and it would, and I can speculate that this is probably one of the reasons why a referral has been made to the FID. It's I think that's a fair comment, because every person who is trained in anti-money laundering or sensitized to money laundering would quickly be able to pick up that this is one of those red flag transactions.
That transaction disturbed me for the reasons that Peter outlined, and because also, even with attorneys, there are certain obligations now which you have, because you're supposed to look at a transaction like that and actually report on it. Now, the other transaction which concerned me was the one where the account was opened at NCB. Mm-hmm. It was opened with no money in it. And I didn't know you could open an account with no money in it. A couple of days later, there was a deposit of a little over $143,000 US, which came from SSL. Mm-hmm. And in the context of the discussions which we have been having about SSL, I believe that the Prime Minister needs to address this and explain how and why that money came into his account from SSL. It was deeply concerning to me, and I'm sure that it must be deeply concerning to all the people who not only lost money, but know people who lost money, and the number one concern is what happened to borrowed money. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on this situation. I'm just simply saying that the Prime Minister has to have a level of political sensitivity, and he has a duty to come to the country and explain some of these transactions to which we have been alerted by this report.
And Comrade Leader, at the press conference that was held last week, you raised the issue of tax compliance and why it is troubling. For our viewers who might not have read the report or understand the issues surrounding tax compliance, I want you to explain it for them and why it's a problem.
Well, the report indicates that the tax returns for Mr. Holness's private companies, in one called PM that he owns 100% of, and the others that are referred to in the report, for the 2021 year of assessment, financial year, they filed nil returns, meaning that they had no tax. They declared no taxable income and no taxable expenses, tax deductible expenses. Now, that the report says is inconsistent with the information provided to the Integrity Commission by Mr. Holness, which shows that these companies were in fact very active. They had receipts, they had expenditures. As I've said, over 400 million of transactions over the period was passing between these companies, to and fro. So, and the report makes specific reference to items of income that were earned during the period. So the report makes reference to a provision in the Income Tax Act, which makes it a criminal offense not to accurately report one's taxable income when you're filing returns. So this is another very serious matter. You know, the Prime Minister is the head of the government, and you know, he should not be filing tax returns which are not consistent with the reality of the transactions of those companies. So this is a big issue as well.
Some of the concerns that we have seen in the public domain is that these two institutions to which the report from the Integrity Commission is referred to, Tax Administration Jamaica and the Financial Investigation Division, they both fall under the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. The Minister reports to the Prime Minister. There's a sense of public concern that there might be interference or obstruction of the investigation. Senator Bunting, is that a legitimate position for members of the public to take?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister uses his own standard. When his ministers got into trouble, Wheatley, Royal Reid,
Lloyd Green.
Floyd. Well, no.
Floyd was a little different.
That was a little different. He got into trouble.
He was put in
St. Elizabeth.
He was put in the Naughty
J.C. Hutchinson.
He told them they had to step aside. They had to leave the cabinet because it would not have been appropriate for them to remain and perhaps and have the risk or the perception that they could obstruct the investigation. Now, there's no minister in a stronger position to obstruct an investigation than the Prime Minister himself. He, for example, is going to determine who the replacement Minister of Finance will be. He, under whose portfolio the FID falls. The FID right now does not have a permanent chief technical director, I believe the post is called, or technical director. The head of the FID was Selvin Hay, who retired a couple months ago. So it only has an acting head now. So there is not even any security of tenure for who is there. So the Minister of Finance is going to be very carefully selected. Let me just say that. We can expect that he or she will be very carefully selected. But I think the public is right to be concerned. I think any well-thinking person would be concerned. You cannot investigate yourself, or you cannot oversee those who are investigating you. That's just a basic principle. And we've seen over and over again where persons, whether in the private or public sector, that find themselves in such a position have to step aside to allow the investigation to be complete.
Some contend that he has not broken any code of ethics and therefore he should not step aside. In fact, some go as far as to say that he has been vindicated, given that the Integrity Commission engaged an international forensic accounting firm. They found nothing.
That's not true.
No,
That's not true.
That's what he said.
True.
So I want you to engage with that perspective.
In fact, I would say the fact that the report has not been released, in my view, indicates to me that there may be potential down the road for the possibility of prosecution. And in any investigation, if you have that kind of information, you're not going to put it in the public domain. And we have to, and in fact, I think, again, it is in support of the Director of Investigation saying, let us refer it to the FID. And I'm sure in their exchange of information, they have an MOU that they will provide as much information to the FID so that the FID can come to a conclusion about illicit enrichment.
And they're not restricted to providing the information in the public report. Their MOU allows them to exchange the report of the forensic investigator, anything else that they have.
Yeah. And it may well be that a lot of the information that we have here on the details of the transactions that the companies have entered into, that the forensic investigation that was done was helpful in getting some of this information. But as has been said, it's not sufficient to conclude the investigation, and it needs to be concluded. Why? Because the Prime Minister remains under a cloud. His Integrity Commission statutory declarations from 2021 onwards have not been certified, and the report indicates that they cannot be certified until the Integrity Commission is satisfied that they are in order. So it's very important that this matter be allowed to come to a conclusion. And I think it's reprehensible, the initial responses that we're hearing from the government side, suggesting that as far as they're concerned, this matter is at an end. It should not be referred any further and so on. They're going to leave the Prime Minister under a cloud unless they let this matter be followed through to its end. And so I don't think that their responses really are helpful to his situation at all.
To me, they should be asking everybody to act hastily,
yes,
especially if they believe in his innocence, so that he can be cleared.
There is conflict of interest. So the Prime Minister appointed his business partner and co-investor in his real estate company, Norman Brown, to the chairmanship of UDC and the Housing Association of Jamaica, which both, as Senator Bunting said, fall under the Prime Minister's portfolio. Why is there a conflict here? You know,
well, let's just say the UDC and HAJ are two of the biggest public sector agencies in terms of expenditures, right? They spend billions of dollars. They're also significantly in the business of construction, housing, real estate development, which is the same type of activity that the Prime Minister is in, right? So the significant conflict is that you're appointing your business partner to head these two entities. They are engaging contractors, spending billions of dollars, and your private company is also doing the same thing. It is a significant conflict. And that individual, Marky, there's been no adverse finding in relation to his conduct in either of the entities at this point in time. But frankly, that person should not be in that position. He should remove himself so that there is no conflict at all. And it shouldn't even come to this. The fact of the matter is that, 18 Degrees North highlighted this a couple months ago of his directorship in these companies and the conflict with his business relationship with the Prime Minister. He should have removed himself long ago.
A prevailing view that exists on this particular matter of conflict of interest is that in as much as the Integrity Commission has not laid a charge, so there's this issue of charge. So people see that once there's no charge being laid, then nothing is wrong. Tell me why the moral objection is still in place, still intact, still sound, even if there is no charge being brought.
It's interesting. The Integrity Commission developed a code of conduct for politicians. And in hindsight, it's instructive that every PNP member of Parliament sign that at the invitation of the leader of the opposition. Not a single member of the GLP signed that. And this code of conduct was largely based on the Nolan principles.
7 principles of good governance.
Of good governance, widely accepted. There is nothing there that you could think of any well-thinking person would hesitate to sign. But yet no one has signed it. But the reason that these principles were developed was that for your leaders, you need a higher bar than criminal conduct. If those who say, well, they're not charged
Right.
criminally, therefore everything is all right, then we've really hit rock bottom. And as the lawyers could explain, because you're not able to prove a criminal charge doesn't necessarily mean the person is innocent. It just means the prosecution cannot prove it. So they attempt to set these principles, which are at a much higher level, for you to avoid conflicts of interest, for you to conduct yourselves in such a way that you are not preferring your own wealth, your own balance sheet at the denial of the benefit to the taxpayers and so on. So I think it is really shameful that people are saying because we don't have a criminal conviction, then everything is okay, or a criminal charge, therefore everything is okay.
This is not a situation where the Prime Minister has been held to have not acted improperly. What they've said is that there's enough here that it warrants another agency with the necessary powers of investigation to take it to its logical conclusion. They need to get involved. So that is a cloud that is the Prime Minister's operating under now.
It is very interesting that Senator Bunting raised the Nolan's principles of conduct for public officials. I note where the report said that some of the findings are antithetical to those principles. Comrade Leader, what happened to the impeachment bill that would seek to remove public officials who contravene these principles of good conduct in office?
It's a sad story. Under Bruce Golding, when he was Prime Minister, an impeachment bill was tabled. I think it was in 2010 or thereabouts. It wasn't pursued. And many years later, in 2001, I think it was, when we had the incident with a member of Parliament who was caught on video assaulting a female with a stool, and it was 2021. There was a situation of the entire society was in uproar about this, and yet nothing could be done about it in order to ensure accountability. So I reviewed the bill that had been prepared by Bruce Golding, and I did some adjustments to make it more comprehensive so that it could capture not just the conduct in Parliament itself, but conduct by any parliamentarian that brings the office of a parliamentarian into disrepute. And I tabled it as a private member's bill. The JLP in their 2016 manifesto had said they would be passing impeachment legislation, but they have not allowed this bill to go forward. I wanted it to be sent to a joint select committee so that stakeholders in and outside of Parliament could weigh in on it, and we could come up with, tweak it to the extent necessary to make it something that would really enhance the governance and the accountability of public officials. It has not been allowed to go forward. And in fact, in the Constitutional Reform Committee report, which our representatives did not sign, they have recommended that we not have an impeachment provision in our Constitution. And the majority on that committee are persons who were appointed by the government. So their view on this has been flip-flopping, and it has been inconsistent, and we feel it is necessary that there must be something in the Constitution that would deal with delinquent behavior by parliamentarians, elected officials or appointed senators, so that if their conduct brings their office into disrepute, something can be done about it.
So the next PNP government will pass the impeachment bill in Parliament?
Yes, we will be pursuing it. And, we hope that we can get consensus around it, because I don't personally believe that the constitutional amendments that don't enjoy bipartisan consensus is not the way to go. We've always proceeded on the basis of consensus around constitutional change. Now, this is a position that the JLP had been putting forward before, that they want to see impeachment happen. I'm hoping that they will revise their current view and we'll be able to move forward with consensus on this thing. And I hope that society as a whole will get behind it. But we will be pursuing it.
On the matter of revision, the Prime Minister has called for a revision of the Integrity Commissions Act. What is the opposition's position on that?
Well, we are presently reviewing. We have a joint select committee which is reviewing the Integrity Commission Act. We have not concluded those deliberations. So I personally was a little taken aback when he says, I will change the law. because we are contemplating what sort of changes we would want to see in the legislation. Listen, Cleveland, let's be clear. Nobody likes to complete a statutory declaration. It is extremely invasive. There are things that you will forget because they happened a long time ago before you became a parliamentarian, and you might just not recall some of the things. It's an uncomfortable position to be in, and an uncomfortable position for your family to be in, because they come under scrutiny simply because they are your family, not because they are involved in politics. But you see, this country needs to be aware that they are the ones that determine what kind of Jamaica we have. And that is why it disturbs me when you say that there are people who think that nothing has happened at all. If we don't begin to hold our leaders to a higher standard of accountability, all we will have is a declining sense of morality. The public needs to get engaged in reforming this country in the way that it needs to be done. And their contribution will be to say, no, we're not putting up with this.
I'm very suspicious of the motivations of the government in relation to the Integrity Commission, because their desires to amend it
It's to weaken it.
are as a reflex to reports which are adverse to them. So
make
they
them
clearly are
uncomfortable.
motivated to dismantle it, neuter it, and make it as ineffective as possible. I'm in favor of nurturing that
Yes.
institution, making it more effective. And the Integrity Commission itself, in its annual reports, have pointed out things that they would like to see adjusted in the legislation. I'm in favor of a review of the legislation.
Yes.
I'm in favor of making it more cohesive, more effective. I am not in favor of undermining the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission. Corruption is a big problem in the country, and it flows into the crime and violence problems that we have, the lack of trust of the people in their elected officials, and so on. We need to clean up Jamaica.
Yes.
And we need to clean up public life. And the Integrity Commission is an important part of doing that. So any amendments which are motivated by an intent to make it less effective, ineffective, neuter it, dismantle it, do not have our support.
The FID is a member of what's called the Egmont Group. This is international grouping of financial intelligence units, and they share financial intelligence. So just imagine that every other country who is a member of this Egmont Group, they will now be looking into the financial intelligence, or they will have the capabilities to look into the financial information and other information which may not be set out here, but which the FID will have to pursue. And the FID might very well be asking for their cooperation. Now, is this really a process that you want to put the country through while the Prime Minister is being examined, perhaps not just by our own FID, but other members of other financial intelligence units across the world?
Frankly, the whole situation that we're faced, where an agency of government that falls under the Ministry of Finance, two agencies as we pointed out, Tax Administration Jamaica and the Financial Investigations Division, are being asked to investigate the Prime Minister and companies that he is associated with, is an untenable situation for the country to go through. How could a Minister of Finance be comfortable that his boss is being investigated and his agencies that report to him or her have to be investigating the Prime Minister? It is unheard of, and it is not something which Jamaica has ever had to deal with before, and I don't think it's right that the country should be put through this. There should be elections, and the country should be given the opportunity to choose a government in light of what is going on now.
So where do we go from here? What will be the disposition of the opposition with respect to this investigation? What we have seen on social media is that persons are calling on the opposition to table a motion of no confidence to trigger a debate in Parliament. Is that something that the opposition is willing to do, has considered?
We did it in relation to the situation out of the 2010 incursion and what followed from that. So it's not something that we are not familiar with. And so it is something that we are considering, yes.
We have an obligation, and I believe others in media, etc., to really break it down into bite-sized portions and just take one thing at a time. Just take positive media solutions, for example, which arose from some old equipment that the Prime Minister had, some cameras and drones and stuff that were years old, that he valued at $2.5 million. But the company was formed in 2020. By 2021, at $2.5 million, I was translating into over 20 million of revenues. But that same company was able between 2021 and 22 to be transferring $72 million to Imperium. That same company, the secretary, Mark Hazan, told 18 Degrees North that he knew nothing about it. He knew nothing about it. That was the secretary of the company who is shown to have contributed 2.1 million as a shareholder contribution, even though he owns 1 share, and Imperium, which owns 99 shares, their shareholder contribution was 2.9 million. So Mr. Hazan, although he says he knows nothing about it, based on what Positive Media has presented to the Integrity Commission, he has paid a huge premium for his 1 share. So a lot of these things just don't make any commercial sense.
And the clients of Positive Media that from which they've earned this revenue were the Jamaica Labour Party,
His constituency.
Mr. Holness's constituency organization,
and one very curious company called Green Emerald. There's a lot more can be said about.
A big question for the Integrity Commission was the income generating capacity of these entities to have the sums of funds in their accounts as reflected. But the people want to know if the opposition will be sitting in Parliament with the Prime Minister, noting what the Prime Minister said when he was opposition leader regarding the outcome of the investigation into then Minister of State Richard Hazan, where he said that the opposition will not sit in Parliament with someone who has been the subject of adverse findings from a report.
The Contractor General.
The Contractor General. Will the opposition be doing the same?
Our obligation as members of Parliament is to attend Parliament and represent persons who elected us. So any decision not to attend Parliament on any prolonged basis would be a very serious one. And we would have to consider that very carefully. At this point in time, all options are open. We haven't come to any final decisions on any of those issues. We've been trying to digest the report. We've been trying to explain to Jamaica what the report says. And we've been having dialogue with other stakeholders in the society so to see what their positions on the matter will be. But clearly this is a new era for Jamaica. We're on uncharted waters, and we need to, as an opposition, we need to assert ourselves appropriately so that there is accountability and that the people of Jamaica's interests are protected. And that's what we will be doing. High standards of ethics and moral conduct are expected of the leaders of the country. And our system depends on our leaders behaving in accordance with those standards. And where you have a report from the agency that has been established to ensure integrity in public life and to expose corruption, delivering a report like this, which has serious issues that have come out of it, which are unresolved, it means that Jamaica needs to draw brakes. There needs to be a fundamental change at this point in time. And that change is either the calling of elections to allow the people of Jamaica to decide who they want to govern them going forward, given the mess that we're now in with this, or the Prime Minister himself stepping down. It's one or the other. And I wait to hear which one it will be.
There you have it, the People's Parliament. I want to thank our panelists for joining us to dissect the Integrity Commission's report concerning the Prime Minister's declarations. A lot we unfolded here this afternoon. But thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in. And I urge you to read the report for yourself and stay tuned.